So I didn't make any announcements about this. I just sort of assumed we would continue. Yeah.
That's the next one.
Yeah, I like the little gold coin in the middle there.
Although somebody said that I probably should, instead of buying it, I should have pirated it.
Yes. Yes. I got this and I got the audiobook, and I started listening to the introduction, and it sounds kind of my impression of it was that it's going to be kind of incomplete, right? Because it wasn't really ready to kind of go out to press, but it'll be.
It's also roughly in the area of his PhD thesis too, is it not? So he's been thinking about it a while.
Yes, yeah, he's been sitting on it, and apparently he found out, when he was on Madagascar, he found out about this, and one of the ways that he found out was that he had a relationship with someone who claimed she was descended from these people. So that's kind of cool. Gives it a little bit more of a it's interesting to think of the, when we think about the pirates of the Caribbean, we think about, Tortuga or one of these places, that they supposedly hold up, but it's interesting to imagine them going, to the other side of Africa, but why not? I just because I like Tom Hardy so much, I just watched Taboo again, and they take off at the end of that. They get a ship finally, and they all take off into the blue, and that does seem like it's a kind of an interesting sort of romantic idea from another era, right? That there is a way to escape. But not anymore. I don't know what we do now. We go to it's maybe now the futuristic alternative is something like, what's that series, that sci-fi series, The Expanse, right? Where you go out to the belt.
Go to Mars.
Yeah, you go to Mars. Yeah, but Mars becomes in that series, in that set of novels, Mars becomes kind of a militaristic society. So very, very structured.
God of war, after all.
Yeah, yeah. Not the type of thing that that Elon has been talking about, where everything will be by consensus. And,
it's just like Twitter, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everybody who agrees with them will be will get their consensus. It's not this word. You keep using this word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So, anywho, oh yeah, Total Recall. I had forgotten that. Oh, it's another. Yeah.
Plot-wise and visually, that doesn't hold up as well. I think I watched it about 4 months ago, and it's not as pretty a film as it once was.
Yeah, I suppose the big moment there is the eyes bugging out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the special effects just make it seem like more over the top than it was before, even. So
yeah, because at this point they're just kind of silly. Yeah. So the end of this. Last week when we were talking with Scott, he was sort of making the case that the end of this would answer all our questions, and kind of would be and would answer a lot of the questions and a lot of the I don't know if I would go as far as to call them critiques, but comments that we had had about kind of his project and his claims, and his his ideas about how it all ought to work. So do we want to talk about that? Our sort of our reaction, our findings about that? Did it live up to that promise?
I didn't think he was as abrasive in person as I might have predicted from the book.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found that difference kind of intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had met him once before. I did a like a half hour video with him months and months ago. And yeah, and I found him, you know, and I think the way that I discovered him was I had posted something on YouTube and probably had tweeted about it, and I had gotten back this kind of he had responded, "Oh, hey Tim, you're visual there for a moment. Now you're not."
Fleeting moment.
Yes, just to prove that he exists. And he had responded to me, and he had said, you know, join the analog revolution or something, or you know, and I had kind of said, what are you talking about? And so and then we got talking, and I was, you know, and that came at a very good moment for me, because I was trying to, initially I was just trying to update that little writing handbook that, you know, my father had written, and I had revised a little bit. And then I thought, well, okay, you know, maybe I will, you know, put in all of the note making stuff at the beginning of it, and turn it into something slightly different. And so the timing for me was very auspicious or synchronistic or something. So that what does your mug say, Chris?
Can you read it?
This is my tidying up on ice. I've got one that my wife made for me. It's got a I think it's a water tiger. I don't know what she was kind of playing around with decals that she could get from China. So
I haven't ordered it yet, but I designed a Zettelkasten mug, and I haven't pulled the trigger to actually purchase one yet, because I'm not sure how the family would react to it being in the cupboard.
Why is it aggressive?
No, it's not aggressive. It's here, let me see if I can pull up, because I posted what it looks like. Here, I'll give you a link.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
So it's got a kind of cartoon image of Luhmann on one side, and then on the other side it says Nikolaus Luhmann did not invent the Zettelkasten.
Nice. That's fun. Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun.
Although there is a 15% discount on it, you know, this week. So if you buy it at the shop, it's.
Speaking of customs things, have you seen Scott's new promotion for his #1 wooden card box for $995?
Good grief. Wow.
So
made out of 20-year-old wood with complete
cedar, yeah.
nail holes and knots in it.
So here, having read newsletter #1, he's running a test to see who would actually do this.
Mm-hmm.
And having probably put more man hours into searching for boxes, thinking about making my own custom box, all the old types of boxes.
Mm-hmm.
This is dramatically overpriced. You could buy 5 of Dan's entire cabinets, probably fully restored, or even built from scratch. In fact, I just saw one yesterday is probably one of the best deals. If you go to eBay and search for Yaman and Irby, somebody has restored an old version of a 3-tier, and they're super rare. It's one of the first ones I've ever seen, although I think he recreated the top section, but it's and I couldn't tell if it was 3x5 or 4x6 drawers on the top, about 15. And then there's a second section below that with 2 file drawer size filing things with 3 card drawers in the middle. And then the bottom section has tip out sections that essentially were originally meant for catalogs. But it's it's probably a piece of furniture about as big as this bookcase behind me, and I'm sitting. But the guy had it listed for like 775, fully restored. It looked like it was in gorgeous shape.
Wow.
And from the early 1600s, but with 10 times the storage capacity as Scott's. Well, I didn't see a price on Scott's, but you could have a woodworker custom make one of those for $100 and probably do it even for less if you did it yourself.
I think Scott's trying to prove what a great marketer he is.
Well, and I think I think that kind of makes sense to me, because really, if you have only one, and he will find a buyer for that. I'm hearing something from you, Tim, but I don't think it's you. Are we getting? I can't tell if you're speaking or if there's somebody behind you talking, Tim.
Nice background music in the coffee shop. Hence the coffee beans.
Oh, nice. All right.
I thought that was just your creative Zoom background.
They're not mongoose turds or anything like that. They are actual coffee beans, pre-digested.
Right.
But on the coffee mugs thing that we were just going on about, there's obviously a whole load of ones with good memes on, but I got caught out slightly. I ended up, partly because of the COVID thing and partly because I got fed up with the amount of rubbish that goes out for you. I'm in a 3 million square foot shopping mall, and there are in the building and immediately adjacent, as in they are next doors with no buildings in the way. There are 9 Starbucks.
Wow.
Right? But in addition to that, there used to be 2 Costa coffees, and there are still 3 Caribou coffees, along with at least 14 other sort of one-offs, two-offs, semi-independents. And that's before you get down to saying, I want to go to the local supermarket and have a coffee there because it's cheapest.
Right.
And I sat there one day and I counted for like the hour, and they went through 3,500 disposable cups in an hour. And so I thought, oh, I'll get myself a metal one. So it's just twin skin metal with a plastic covering. Between the plastic and the metal used to be the branding by the coffee shop that I bought it at. But slowly, the join between the metal and the plastic, when you're washing it out, it started to go a bit damp and not quite mouldy, but it was clearly damaging the paper. So I managed to unscrew it, take the paper out. All of a sudden, the one coffee shop that was giving me a discount for bringing my own cup stopped because it was their bit of paper. And as soon as it went out, Costa Coffee, who weren't the branded piece of paper, started giving me a discount because I've now got an unbranded one. So swings and roundabouts, it was about equal. But with labour here is cheap. So the retail clients, i.e. you, me and the shop, don't sort rubbish. It gets sorted in the basement.
Mm.
And you look at the amount of wasted food, which in some cases includes whole pizzas still in the box,
Wow.
right? Because they've had enough and they've got to go. They want to go. They want to go somewhere else. So it gets left behind. And I don't think the energy here is too bad. But in the shopping mall, think of the bigger ones, of which we've got about 6 really big ones, although this is the biggest. The real carbon footprint comes from the waste food and the other rubbish. So partly because obviously we're warm, we don't get frosts. So a bit like some of your more desert places, although it snows in Texas, it doesn't really snow here. It snowed twice in the last 14 years that I've been in. And both times it's been up the mountains. It's not been down here at sea level.
Sure.
Where almost everybody lives. Most people here live between normally the coastline up to 100 meters, excluding how high their building is. And almost nobody lives above 100 meters. There's a few hotels up in the mountains, but they're relatively small and relatively far from here as well. And when I was engineering operations on a major hotel there, we were weighing our stuff to make sure we could track somewhere. And the non-uniform laundry for the hotel, so that's table laundry, tablecloths, napkins, and bedding, plus all the extra towels that you had, because there's hotel swimming pools, not just the bedrooms, right? We were averaging 22 tons of laundry a day.
Wow.
Which is, and it had, and the nearest laundry was like 25 kilometers away. So it wasn't like it was just going round corner. It was going, 12 miles down the road and then 12 miles back again. So there was a constant churn. That said, they have reasonable food hygiene stuff here. 2 elements of which is you can't take what they call a carton, which is a cardboard box, into the area with food preparation. Partly because a lot of them will be corrugated cardboard, and you can't guarantee what's hiding in the corrugations. And the other one is, and it started with McDonald's, and then a lot of people joined in. McDonald's wanted to be not sued, rather like they got sued a few years back for suddenly forgetting that people with vegetarian habits don't want their fries fried in pork fat. Right? Because they forgot to say that they'd gone back to using pork fat because they double cook.
That's got to be kind of a problem in that part of the world.
Well, here the problem is reuse of the cooking oil by effectively those people that say, we'll collect it for you and dispose of it for you correctly. What they then do, of course, is they give it a coarse filtering and resell it as fresh. So they're trying to clamp down on that. So McDonald's said, this is clearly a risk. We will nip it in the bud. How do we do that? So they went to somebody who was already doing a certain amount and said, would you like some cooking oil? And the guy said, yes. How much you got? And they sort of said, like this much, right? Because we're McDonald's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he went, oh, okay. But do you need diesel fuel? And they said, yes. So they convert it to diesel fuel. So all of the McDonald's vehicles here are fueled off of their
Off of biodiesel, yeah.
off of their waste cooking oil.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole load of other people joined in, including us. We were getting fed up with having to clean the drains because the staff keep forgetting it's so easy just to chuck it down the sink. And certain drains, i.e. those going to kitchens rather than those going to a stack of toilets, were getting clogged up. And so we got hold of the same guy, said, what's the minimum amount that makes it sensible for you to come and pick it up and return it as diesel? And we got it, for other reasons, we got it cheaper than McDonald's. And it was 3,000 litres, so it's 3 cubic metres.
Mm.
So that's like 100 cubic feet. And we thought, okay, at the moment at that point we were recovering 300 litres a month. And then we told the kitchen staff, your bonus is connected to the amount of cooking oil going out the front door or the back door. We halved our drainage cleaning costs, and it was turning over every less than 3 weeks, more than 2 weeks.
Mm.
But we got 20 restaurants, so there's 10 million plus meals a year. So we're churning some stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, because of where we were, and because you couldn't just walk out the door and go somewhere else. Once they were there, most people stayed. Although this was the other thing that was wrong with the business model. Of course, the business model came out pre-noughties, as though everybody goes away for 2 weeks and stays put. It's a resort type hotel.
Mm.
Nobody does that anymore. You go to one big hotel, you have a few days, then you go to a smaller one elsewhere in town. So the average stay when I was there for the first 5 years of operation, the average stay was 4 days, 4 nights, as opposed to 14 or 13 nights was the original expectation with all the original budgets put on.
Mm-hmm.
And so the market's changed. And one of the reasons why Dubai is still, according to TripAdvisor, the #1 destination is they give you discounts for getting off the plane and staying a couple of days and then going back on the plane.
Mm.
So if you're going London to Sydney and you're with any one of the 4 or 5 big airlines
Mm-hmm.
coming to the region, you're quite likely to have a little bit of encouragement to take a free. It's a 22-hour flight.
It's a layover incentive, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, London to Sydney is not a walk in the park.
Right.
So as much as you might say, well, the A380 is a big plane. There's a shower, there's a bar, there's decent food, if you're first class at least,
Mm-hmm.
and all the rest of it. But you come off for a couple of nights or 3 nights.
Mm-hmm.
So it pushes up, like Pelosi says in The Wire, it's juking the stats. It's either the murder stats or it's the kids' scores out of school stats,
Mm-hmm.
juking the stats.
Yep.
We just corrupt them by corrupting all the clients by saying, get off the plane for more than 3 hours, stay 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights. And they've also just dropped for the residents, they've just dropped the 30% alcohol tax. That's been there from day one. So although I could go and buy port, no problem, and I could go and buy alcohol, no problem. The alcohol, you need to have an extra ID card. So it's a bit like a driving license. I've never bought one. And in theory, if I go to a bar in a hotel, I'm supposed to be asked for it. Except, I really look like a young Muslim, right? So I've never had a problem. Not many people get a problem, but every now and then you see an Arab turn up outside the liquor store, and there's like two main brands, and he sends his Indian T-boy in, who has a license because boss has paid for it. It's like $20. Dives in, gets 3 cases of beer, puts it in his car or truck or SUV, and off he drives. And you still get the odd, clearly somebody's local and Muslim in local dress in the bars. It's not hard and fast. Also with COVID, one of the nice things, when I first arrived, during Ramadan, you can't eat and drink in public. Because they can't eat and drink during the daylight hour.
Right.
It's literally it's no smoking, no chewing gum, no water, no food, no sex. So even if you're in a restaurant and it's got outward facing windows, they have to black them out. So it feels a bit weird. Like it's like noon, I'm having lunch and it's pitch black. All the lights are on. And in the shopping malls, because of the way they were built, there was never a way you could screen it on because it's part of a walkway, right? So you could buy it, take away, but they never told you where to take it away to eat there and then, right? So there's quite a few people that sort of sat down in the food court and started eating and get chased out by security. But with the change of COVID, they'd started to screen off areas. So, particularly in the shopping malls, you look at some of the shops, and there's like an extra curtain rail in the ceiling, which has got big blackout curtains. And you have to walk through the curtain, or there's a little archway created with a bit of curtain time. And it was fine. You just couldn't walk around. And you'd forget, you'd pick your bottle of water up out of a coffee shop and go for a walk. And the stupid thing is, they wouldn't sell you popcorn to go in the cinema because the cinema was mixed. The locals and right, and so back then when it was hard and fast, the numbers of people in the shopping malls during Ramadan was quite small until that prayer time for sunset. Everybody turns up. It's like, it's like Penn Station at rush hour. Crazy. Something must have happened somewhere, and then all of a sudden, 3 days before Ramadan, when most of the restaurants in the shopping malls have let half their staff go on holiday, they said, "No need. Muslims are not affected by watching people eat and drink. You can do what you like." So they had to change all of the holiday arrangements for a lot of the staff because they literally go down to like a third man in because they're only open for a couple of hours at night when it's dark. So, and Ramadan moves, and they did it during the summertime. That was a couple of years back. Now it's going to turn up in, I think it's end of March, early April. But this is where it gets stupid. My first Ramadan I celebrated in August, back in the 1970s. And I'd forgotten it. I didn't think I was first trip out here, just went. And the second time was a few years later with Muslim Brotherhood, when it was literally a week away from Christmas. So we got a Catholic, Protestant, atheist, Muslim Christmas do with Arabic food in an Arabic restaurant, or Middle Eastern food with a Middle Eastern food, belly dancers and a Christmas tree. Because it was all the same fortnight, as it happens. Anyway, chapter 21 onwards, right?
Chris suggested, we should sort of get to this. So, Alaman, you want to kind of
Yeah. Yeah. So just let me answer my own question. So it's been amazing to me
Oh,
that,
first put your
oh,
question on the record for the video viewers who were
Oh,
okay.
here.
right.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Who aren't seeing the chat. Good idea.
Yeah. Thank you. So the question is if reading Scott's book has changed our practice in note making. Okay. And for myself, now that I do the physical, I'm trying to work out how to use Obsidian, but I interact with the text and the ideas so much more, and it's been a total game changer for me. Right? I don't know if it's just a limitation of the modality of electronic, or that you can't or don't interact as deeply, or if I was doing something wrong with the Obsidian, but now I take notes on the bib cards. I go over them and I look at, a certain subset and I identify the key terms. And then I determine where I'm going to file them, right? Which is, that's what Scott was talking about.
Mhm.
And then I take all those key terms and I index them, right? Which I'm further thinking about them and I'm further writing them down in there. And then I file the main card, the cards in my main box. And it's just been amazing. And again, I'm not just sure if I'm just wasn't leveraging the electronic mode as much as I could. It's been huge. I mean, Scott's book has been a huge game changer for me.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Pat, you would have the counter argument probably.
Well, I don't think I would counter what Elliman just said, that the forcing of examining the notes that you're making is the key, as I noted in the side conversation there.
Mhm.
The forcing of where to decide to put the card that you just wrote, which is your summation of whatever idea you're focusing on. That forcing is what brings the attention to associating with other ideas that you already have or that you may be thinking about. And that's the key as benefit, I think, of the physical card, because you've got to do that. You've got to say, where am I going to put this thing and what number am I going to give it? And then the index just acts as a way of recording a key word or keywords for that particular card. But you can do all that in a digital system, as I have shown in my posted notes. But it's more encouraged by a physical system than it is by a digital, because you can relapse and fall back into just piling notes into your Obsidian, as Readwise does so nicely.
Right. I guess that's been my experience too, is that I think, as you said, Alan, the way, figuring where, and that, and actually sort of forcing myself, as Pat has said, the force that is, that, or the, I think force is probably the right word, that happens there is, I think, the key, because I was excited when I was using Obsidian, kind of exclusively. I was super excited that I was collecting all of this stuff, but I wasn't, early on in the book, he talks about kind of the, the collector's fallacy sort of idea. And I think there is some truth to that it's fun and easy, the technology makes it very easy to collect a lot of information that, that I think, finding myself being a little bit too promiscuous about that, just grabbing everything, and even now, I get my 15 Readwise, notes every morning to, to kind of go through, and some of them I think on any given day, I'm eliminating a few of those notes because I just look at them and I think, what was I thinking? highlighted this, and and it got swept in. It wasn't something that I need to know, that I need to remember. So that, yeah, I think that for me also, the idea of having something that I will have to take, and it's possible to be bad about that too, right? And to let things kind of pile up for a little while, right? But then you've got a pile of cards, and it's like, oh, I got to figure out how to get these in the box.
Yes, the motivation.
Yeah.
The counter to all this is that there's a great deal of friction, which Scott admits, which he says is a benefit of the physical system. And the question you should ask is, expending all that work to overcome that friction, which takes more time.
Oh, come on, Kat.
Which takes more time. Is that really worth it? Because you're concentrating this effort on processing these physical notes, but you aren't producing any output. So is it really better to spend more time on fewer notes and expend that time rather than focusing on creating output? Because I think the whole message is that it's the output that is the measure of whether all this is worthwhile doing, other than your own self enrichment.
Yeah, I do.
I like the idea of the entry point. That was the one unique contribution to my existing way of thinking. And I mean, we've talked before about the cognitive benefits of all of these different practices. That, again, it just adds a decision-making thoughtfulness to the process. I contend, I don't know how Patrick sees this, but I contend that there's a way to, with the digital approach, create a kind of a rule for yourself, which pretty much duplicates the same thing, and that is, for any note I add, I always connect a link, and I may have multiple links, but my rule is the first link should be the best one. So in the order that they appear, so I'm in a way trying to duplicate that decision-making process by saying, okay, the first link that I'll add to this note is, to me, the best connection, most meaningful connection. So there still is a process then of thinking about things that's dictated by, kind of committing to that priority.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there isn't a possible benefit to creating a prioritization of your notes as they're created, and rather than necessarily immediately processing a note saying, this is an important idea and I want to come back to it, and to create a list within your system. These are the things that I'm really interested in and develop output from, and so I will somehow flag them, and whether immediately or in the near future, I'll go back and process them in greater extent, particularly with an outlook of producing something from it further.
And as you're describing that, I am thinking, what's coming into my mind is sort of the way that Sonke Ahrens organized his idea, about, sort of moving from fleeting to reading to permanent notes, and that seems to be, that logic seems to be kind of supported or supports what you're talking about, Patrick, that there's a kind of a series. And I kind of like that idea, because I like to be output focused. And yet I also, there are some things, if I'm reading, when we get to this, right, I'm sure there are going to be some things that I'm going to want to note down that do not have an immediate goal in something that I'm currently working on, right? That I just, know are valuable enough that I want to, I want to remember them, I want to comment on them, and I want to know where the idea came from. And I think that's, so that was what I kind of called source notes. And I do think that those should be part of the thing. Okay, let's see, Tim, you're what are you saying here? There's a lot going on. So, okay, so, and I guess that's another thing that I I don't know if I would say struggle with, but just that that I have a lot of old notes in a lot of different formats that I kind of feel like, oh, I should return to that. I should revisit those, and I should kind of process them and bring them in.
That's the thing, though, is the capitalistic idea of processing these things, or that you feel guilty or like you should because you've collected all this stuff. Now you need to process it. And for me, that's where the disconnect typically happens. And usually, anecdotally, I'll see it happening when people are talking in fora or online or Twitter or Mastodon or wherever. I've collected all this stuff, and now I feel like it's homework to go through it. And you need to divorce yourself from that processing focus and maybe just keep a big pile of it, and that's fine. Have it. And to me, that's the issue too with Obsidian. It's super easy to sweep a bunch of stuff into it that isn't developed and isn't linked. The one benefit to, I think, Lumen system is you're forced to put it somewhere, to link it to some other ID, even if it's a link to only one thing,
right?
By force of proximity of where it's at in the box. And that being forced and have your feet held to the fire to do that one thing allows you to, and maybe an easy analogy for those who are familiar with shoveling snow, you can shovel your snow and put it into piles at the edge of your driveway. And then when you're done, you've got nothing useful. But if you look at the 8-year-old kid who shovels the driveway all the way down and puts it into one massive pile at the bottom so they can build an igloo out of it.
Right.
Now they've got something useful. They did a little bit of extra work along the way, but they had a goal in mind that allowed them to create something useful for themselves. And to me, I think that's one of the issues is, and people like fleeting notes are easy. They come a dime a dozen, and I made $1 million in here in this book. In fact, I think I probably made more interesting ones, particularly in the places where I think Scott didn't actually show his argument or prove his arguments. And there are arguments to be made, and kind of, I think, better ways to do them and structure them. And for me, it was valuable because I think I approach it from and looking at a lot more of the history of these. What were people doing? And then the second question is, how did it benefit them? What did the process allow them to do? Or what did they use along it? What were the affordances? And so if you're doing a practice, what do you get out of it? What does your process look like? So in Lumen's case, I'm always going to put a card next to the thing that's closest to it. And in some sense, in doing that, he's doing the work of the writing and outlining in the moment.
Yeah.
Versus, I think early in our series, I shared a video of an art historian or design historian who did a bunch of research and wrote a bunch of notes on cards, but then he had to go through all his cards again and then he took a big like A2 size sheet of paper and then mapped it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And he put off the work of doing the outlining and the connecting of things until the end of the process,
Mm-hmm.
which for him worked because he knew what he was working on and collecting towards from minute one. He had a goal in mind. And in his mind, it was easier to do that connecting at the end. And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But you're punting that work down the road rather than doing a little bit along the way
Mm-hmm.
each time.
I think that, yeah, and I think that relates a lot to, sort of when do you actually form your plan, right? If you have a sort of a general idea that I'm interested in this kind of idea, this kind of set of facts or ideas or knowledge or whatever, and I'm collecting them with an eye to someday using them, then I think that kind of becomes more legitimate. It becomes something that is useful. I thought the weakest thing for me about the book was the neuroimprinting sort of description and language and all of that. Yeah, it was a little bit
wavy.
It was a little bit too hand waving, too magic-y for me, and didn't, and he had some, in exact, and I think I've said this before, in the same way that that the people who have written the little bestsellers about retrieval practice, right, have some research that they can, some actual published results that they can kind of point to and say, okay, this is why this type of, this is why this this level of spacing, works, right? There's some research about, what the optimal spacing before, you retrieve something or you're asked to, to retrieve it, and where the, the most, the sweet spot of the desirable difficulty. There is a little bit of research that kind of supports that. I don't think that it's the most conclusive necessarily, and I think that in some cases it's the type of research that went looking for the went looking for that answer and found it. So that was sort of the least. I mean, I like the fact that he sort of elbows a space, for analog, especially relative to Aaron's and Forte and Milo and all the other people who are saying that they have really cracked the code, and that whole and he does sort of argue against that that guru aspect of it, while at the same time trying to be a guru. So
yeah, I kept trying to translate the term. I didn't know if he was using it as a technical scientific term.
Right.
When I hear the word imprinting, I think of baby ducks.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever. I didn't know if that's what he meant. Or Hebb used to have this notion of circuits, neural circuits that, the more they fired, fire together, wire together, I think is the expression.
Right.
I didn't know if he was referring to that.
Yeah, and he used an analogy or a metaphor of cutting channels, sometimes, right. Which again, it's like, okay, where's the metaphor end, and where? I mean, I have this issue with science writers too. So I'm not just picking on Scott. Where's the metaphor end and the reality, become more complicated. Tim, what did you want to throw in?
Yeah, I was given what you've collectively just said about Scott's thing. In what I've read outside what we've discussed in other contexts as well, all seem to put down to, yes, if you're doing effectively one thing and one thing only, one project and one project only, and you are highlighting this because it's the bit for the current chapter, and at the end of the week you're going to use it, I think you probably are barking up the right tree, providing that at the end of the week you finish the current chapter.
Mm.
If you have to come back to it 6 months later for whatever reason,
Mhm.
you've got effectively an unsearchable stack of notes, by which time you may have added 3 notes because the reason you've had to come back in 6 months is something happened. Or you might have 3,000 cards sitting there, you don't know.
Mhm.
Whereas in that instance, if I'm fully electronic and and partly, as I've said, since not in reaction to this book, but simply because I want to move to a more card-like but digital way, rather like 2 or 3 of you were saying a few Zooms ago that you can't do the atomic notes because you write essays, right? And I'm of that age too. I mean, we're all grey hair. Those that still got it anyway. We're all grey hair here. In some respects, oh, well, I'm only grey here.
Yeah.
Just got less up here. And I've been pondering this as a sort of side ponder. I haven't bothered to write anything down particularly yet, or even go look for, other than reading what we're reading and or what's being referenced in what we're reading.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about 40 plus years ago when I was working as a vacation job. I'd do 6 weeks solid in a public library. Every now and then I'd be moved from one branch to another. So the sequence, the mental sequence is the same. The physical location and whether it went clockwise A to Z or anti-clockwise changed because of the building shape, or it zigzagged or whatever because of the building shape, or it's the difference between the adult and the children's library, because UK-wise, we tend to separate. Yet, within a day or so in each branch, there wasn't probably. I mostly worked in the one that happened to be near my school, and the one I worked in least was the one at the end of down the end of the road that I used to live in. But I would be able to walk in a straight line from the inquiry desk to the book within less than a week.
Which suggests
And I don't know-
printing, right? So
Yeah, but I know that I hold a map very quickly in my head, and it's the same when I go to construction projects. I find my way around very quickly. Now, I was doing the Royal Opera House in London in 98, 99 up to 2000, and there were 14 main control panels there, and I could walk between all 14 when I was first there within 2 hours. Then they put the rest of the walls up, and I had to go round, so my route had to change.
right.
And then eventually I needed keys to get through doors because the doors had arrived as well. So, but that map sits, and then all the escape stairs got painted different colours, so nobody had to remember where escape stair number 2 was. It's the red stair, or the blue stair, or the green stair, or the yellow stair. So there's almost, they're not quite mnemonics, they're just elements that you could tell a story about, or elements you could have a visual about, that make things just that much quicker. And it's like, and Chris spotted it first, I think. Scott had his books arranged by colour of the spine. Now, of all the possible arrangements, other than taking them off the shelf, getting a forklift to toss them up in the air, and then just randomly putting them back in the first one off the pile, to me, that has got to be the worst way of putting them, bar one. And that's putting them spine to the wall. So, so there's a handful of books in anybody's really decent big collection that will have coloured edges to the paper. that might just be gold, or because it's a high-end book or something similar, or it'll be a gold one where you can slide the book and there'll come a picture. There's quite a few high-end hardbacks do that. But you couldn't do it to the paperbacks, because all the paperbacks look the same. So providing there's a walk, and we've often used the metaphor about a walk through the forest, and we don't necessarily touch every tree. Since we've last spoken about it, I've got another 1,000+ notes further on. And I've started to say, I want to double tier almost my tag system. I've got elements of some of the tags that I use the same way as Brian, what's his name? The ADAH guy that did a lot of the
Jenks, yeah.
early Brian Jenks, yeah, the tall guy.
Yeah.
He uses tags in Obsidian primarily to say, what's the status of this note? Where is it running through the system? But the way he's brought it over is once it gets to the bottom of that sequence, that's it. I'm saying, but this week I might be doing a blog or a piece about A. Next week I'll be doing a blog about X, but there might be 1 or 2 notes that are in both. So my status is I've reused it. So my biggest initial difficulty was, how do I log which note has been used in which piece? Because there's a bunch of us. It's not just me, you know. And I'm pretty sure that some of the notes will never get used.
Right.
And I don't care, because they're there to be an inspiration that may inspire me to do something different and not use it directly. So I'm not going to cite it, quote it, or crop it as a picture or whatever. But it's still, yes, that's the picture of the sugarcane. And that's reminded me, oh no, I need to talk about bamboo because it's still a grass, right? And it, rather like Ali Mae was saying earlier about the engagement with the notes, it's the engagement with the note. And if you could engage, because maybe I'm lucky because I've forced myself to do this transfer, I'm engaging with each note. I'm also saying, hang on a minute, I'm pretty sure there was something just before or just after this that I still want to remember, because I'm trying to work from the more recent ones back, because the original early stuff is all the, you know, the household goods and the registration numbers and what water filter that goes in the water filter. You know, they're not things that are going to go to Obsidian. They're going to stay with Evernote until the next time it comes up to pay for it, and it's going to go whoosh straight into Joplin because it's free. It looks like Evernote, and I've already done half a dozen notebooks, and they go fine. When I was trying to, earlier before Obsidian came along, and I was trying to use Notion, you couldn't get Evernote to talk to Notion and Notion to talk back to Evernote. It just wouldn't work. It would sit there for like 4 hours, and it's moved 2 notes, and not very well. Joplin, export to the archive file type for Evernote works fine. It doesn't work for notebook stacks. You've got to go for each notebook, which is a little pain, but it's not that bad. And the only thing that apart from the fact that some things are not quite in the same place, Joplin comes straight up with Markdown. So go into Joplin to drop it into Obsidian is a piece of cake. At the moment, though, you've still got to muck about and revise your YAML and do a bit more metadata, simply because Obsidian can give you more metadata. Right? As in, which piece did I use this in? I can't do that. I can only have one link. And even this new backlink that comes up in Evernote, it's not a true backlink. It's just this note is linked over there. It's not coming up in the same way. It's not, I'm sure I've written about this before. So I go square bracket, and that not only will it link me to if I've got it, it will make it if I haven't got it in Obsidian. That just, there's no comparison for that in Evernote.
Right.
And now, of course, Obsidian's getting into the integrations. So the only integration that I really use in Evernote is to Google Calendar, except it's one way only. Evernote reads the calendar, full stop. You can't send it to the calendar. You can send it to email. I can email an Evernote, or I can send an email to Evernote. That works both ways, although not for the same thing. So I'm stacking double tags now in the sense of what's the status of this, and I'm using effectively temporary folders to act as though they're a Kanban, because I can flip that in Obsidian, and guess what? It looks like Trello. It goes instantly, visually looks like Trello. So now I'm moving cards inside Obsidian from to do, doing, done, finished, trash, archive, whatever. And it's just, I don't need Trello anymore. Although Trello is very good on that narrow band, it doesn't do much else.
So
it's the engagement with notes. You've got to be engaged with them.
yeah,
And I don't know whether it's the way that, partly because I'm, from the engineering point of view, I'm always thinking schematic network wise. So I was really laughing when you were talking about, I used to use Scrivener, and now I've got Canvas, and I can get a timeline. And I'm going, yeah, that was a piece of paper 30 years ago, because there was nothing else. And then there was AutoCAD and Excel and stuff. But now there's plugins for doing timelines, in Scrivener particularly. And Scrivener's got a couple of programs that it integrates with that are there to build timelines for authors. And they work very well because they keep track of you. So all of a sudden you don't have a character in two places at once. So if there was that 70s film, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. So Susan, George, Pete Fonda, and somebody were doing a bank heist. And somebody was a programmer who'd worked out how to get the car away. They was in some sort of grid system in the countryside in Alabama or Georgia or something. And they were listening to the police commands of where the cars to go. And the programmer would shuffle through his paper output and say, take next left or whatever. So, and then they got told over the radio, what do you mean you want me to go to, sort of like grid A5? You just sent me to Z1. And they realised that the police had figured something out and was sending cards that didn't exist to different places, or to two places at once. And then, of course, they got clean away, except a train went past and wiped them out. And that was the end of the film. But there's that 3D mental model that I build naturally because that's how I think. There's always, so I'm semi-laughing at Scott because he's saying he puts his cards out on a table. Go, yeah, 2D. Where's the third dimension? You can't elevate. You can't see. If you put a little stack, a little deck of cards down, you can't see them. You need them spaced out so you can read them.
Yeah. Okay. You can collapse 2D into 1D, and that can simulate another dimension. But well, let's get to Alaman too, because you had some specific comments on what Tim was saying, I think.
Yeah, so I do want to get to those AI questions in the chat, but first I have a question about what you folks think about these categories, right? So like Tim said, if you have to come back to something a year later, you filed stuff into a black hole. Forrest Perry on YouTube says, don't use any kind of pre-thought out categories. And so I've been convinced of that. And so I've jettisoned Scott's Wikipedia-based categories. But I do, as I go along, make tabbed separator cards, which are categories, so that I can more easily see where I want to file a new card, right? But Forrest seems to think that, no, don't worry about that. You'll intuitively know which part of the Zettelkasten to go and file the new card, because you're always interacting with it, right? Just focus on the level of individual cards. Exactly where does this card fit, and forget everything about categories. So I want to know what your folks' take on that is.
That's interesting. That kind of goes back. That goes to a thing that I was thinking that I think is similar. Is this kind of one project versus many projects thing, right? That that Scott has had really one project for the last year while he's been sort of building out his Antinet. And you might argue that Luhmann had kind of one big project for 30 years, and so the work that they were doing was always, and I think that this comes out in even things going back to what Sankey Arons had said about Luhmann, which I don't think was all wrong. That he never, remember Aaron says, Luhmann never went back to a book or to a source. It's like, well, of course he didn't, because he was going to them in the first place for a specific reason, right? They were, academic, articles, right? So there was like one point, and he went there looking for that one point. And so it wouldn't, it's not like, a very kind of rich, multidisciplinary kind of an opportunity. But what about those interdisciplinary connections, right? What about those things? Because I think, Alaman, this is what you're kind of getting at as well. Okay, what if you have a lot of interests and your hope for the thing is that it is going to help you understand those connections, as they evolve? I hope that without imposing kind of categories on the things, that the exception to that might be the categories or the little tabbed dividers that I use sometimes in the box are about, okay, this is a source, right? This is the dawn of everything, right? Which has all kinds of different things in it, and some of those source notes I kind of keep together in that dawn of everything section. Right. I'm not sure that is going to do me good in the long run. Yeah. So what? Go ahead, Tim.
I'm pretty much in that category in terms of I might have half a dozen significant projects running, and then it's a case of, oh, I like that. Or that's a good quote. Or there's also, in terms of the fiction that I get from it, I like the way that was expressed.
Mm-hmm.
Hold it, because I might want to plagiarize the structure without plagiarizing the actual words. Because the story I'm reading is, say, I don't know, a Kim Stanley Robinson science fiction, and I want to
Mhm.
write a murder story later.
Right.
And so I have no problem that there is a category called everything other than what's above, i.e. general. And it's got, you know, as my Evernote does at the moment, for 33,000 notes, there's about a quarter of those are in general. Because they're of no immediate categorizable use, because the location is the category, I find, whereas the tags give me everything else. Plus, I can do a general word search. So, you know, climate change gets me all the climate change. You know, GMO food gets me all the GMO food. You know,
Mhm.
providing you can use Google at a reasonably advanced level so that you're doing something like, quote, GMO food, close quotes, minus Monsanto, minus Bayer, minus Andrew Whitehead, you're laughing because you don't want to know about the mice for cancer for eating potatoes for 30 years. So I don't see that as a negative because I could search anyone. And if one becomes particular for a reason, it's quite likely because, you know, I'm still finding, I was checking the number of words in a couple of notes yesterday, and there's 13,000 words in a note. You know, it's like 2 blogs. Right? So I can still see, and I'm doing as I put them into Obsidian. I'm not making them as an atomic note that the likes of James Clear would say, "You're doing well, lad." It's like
It's an atomic
You're not
note of the James Clavell type.
you're not doing that well. It's still like six atomics there. It's a whole molecule, and yeah, I know, but it's a 3D molecule. It's not a 2D one.
Ah, it's a
So-
folded protein.
Yeah. So, and
So
it's I don't see it as a problem for if Aliman Ben ended up with 14 drawers of his super long Zettelkasten, and 7 of them said General 1, General 2, General 3, General 4, because they're there to be used, and when they get used, they get a particular meaning.
yeah, I think the question is, can you find them? But also, I think this
Well,
probably
electronically, it's not a problem. I feel sorry for you guys going back to paper.
yeah, that may be a problem. That may be a flaw to the paper system. One of the things that strikes me though, as I'm listening, is that it probably matters, and it probably varies for different people having different experiences, depending on how much they want to use metaphors, right? Rather than and it doesn't strike me that Luhmann, I haven't read that extensively in his corpus, but it doesn't strike me that he was engaging in that kind of thinking that much. That it was more, it was kind of more straightforward, theoretical. I mean, maybe the vocabulary was specialized, kind of sociological vocabulary, but it had meanings that were fairly straightforward. And once you knew the code, you kind of could operate.
And German.
Yeah.
So
Well,
they tend not to have more than one word for something like the English.
Yeah.
There's something too, I think a lot of people miss about, and I don't see anybody talking about it, but there is a huge sparsity to Luhmann's index. So you can look it up online and go visit it. And there's lots of words, but his index compared to, let's say the average commonplace book system indexing, or I presume a lot of our indices, his is incredibly sparse.
Mm-hmm.
So John Locke may have a word like industry, and he'll have 47 different pages to go back and find all those references to industry.
Mm-hmm.
You look in Luhmann's index, a guy who worked in sociology and systems theory, and if you look up those two words, you'll find 2 or 3 index pointers into his thing, because broadly his whole Zettelkasten was about those 2 topics.
Right.
But he's only got 2 pointers into the system,
Right.
or maybe 3. And it's very rare, just in having skimmed down his index, that he's got more than 3 references to any one particular idea or topic.
Mm-hmm.
And
And that's what I'm hoping will happen in mine. I mean, my intuition about it when I'm sort of playing with it and I kind of feel like I'm in the flow is that what I'm going to hopefully end up with is index, kind of topic index cards that are going to point all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And actually allow me to pull together, ideas about, different people's ideas about topics that I find interesting, and that will give me that I mean that's where I'm hoping that the magic is going to be, right?
Yeah.
In kind of creating.
Well, in your case, Dan, you're a historian, so one would think the word history would appear a million times in your index.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, after you've been doing it for 10 years as a professional historian, that index term has no meaning whatsoever, because so much of what you've done is that, versus your students who have done none of that work,
right,
might need,
mm-hmm.
10 or 15 pointers into their space.
Right.
So it's, how do you slowly, and I've been playing around with an idea of how Luhmann's practice was in some sense self-indexing, because he would take trains of thought, and as long as he had a pointer to, if he's talking about sociology and then he relates it to anthropology, then it's good to have an index term to point to. Here's where there's an anthropology card amidst a whole bunch of sociology,
mm-hmm.
and the two don't kind of mix.
Right.
But that anthropology piece may grow and turn into something else. And eventually he'll know it, and you'll know your collection by groups of cards within it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some sense, the tree and branching and network creating of chunks helps to self-index your space, because you'll know that this is where this group of ideas generally is. It's it may be easy to frame it more, or easier to frame it from Mark Bernstein's kind of digital garden analogy.
Mm-hmm.
You're building this garden,
right,
and where some of the types of flowers and trees and bushes may be, or if there's a little creek that runs through it.
mm-hmm.
The question is, how can you stand in or amidst your garden,
right,
and see this bush juxtaposed with that tree over there,
right,
and then be able to connect those two ideas to generate some new thing that maybe you place somewhere further afield.
mm-hmm. Did you go to his thing this week?
Yeah, I went to, it was a lot of very dense, heavy history, and it dramatically increased my reading list.
Okay. I was registered, and then I couldn't find the link, so I was like, oh, I guess.
But Boris actually did a pretty good job. He sent out an email an hour before, and then like 2 minutes before, so that, I saw the notification pop up. It's starting in a minute. So I literally clicked the email and there was the link to go straight to it. But
maybe my registration didn't stick then, because I didn't get that.
They video recorded it too, so you can, and it may actually be easier to do it as video.
Right.
Because a lot of the stuff was so heavy and dense. It's going to take some, if it's the thing you're interested in, it's going to take you some time to unpack it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Well, Chris, that's interesting. If I could interrupt you, it's interesting you brought up about the history, because I would suppose, Dan, that history does not appear in your I mean, philosophy does not appear in my index
Right.
at all, right?
Right. Yeah, it would be
when
things like
when
capitalism or
right.
yeah, right.
Yeah, when I think about okay, I want to put this in the index, I try to think of my future self. Okay, I'm doing, I'm writing this book or whatever, and how can I reference that in my index and then see the links, which is why I like the fact that Scott says you put this term and then the little arrow and then another term, right? So that way you can compare those entries in your index and it's going to, lead you where you need to go and all that.
Yeah.
Well, in some sense, you're creating, I mentioned it earlier in the chat, the associative trails that Vannevar Bush was talking about.
Right.
And in creating a pathway or a branching tree structure that you can walk and traverse, you've seen it before and you know the context of what's going on and you know roughly where those cards are going to be or not going to be. So you have some of that context in your own head, even if you're surprised by it from time to time, like, oh, I forgot I did that thing.
Right. And I think it is assumed, and I think Scott certainly assumes, that when you go to a place that the index is going to take you to an entry point, but then you are going to look at what's on either side and see what, kind of train of thought it's in and what associated thoughts are. I don't have history as an index term in my subject index. I do have it as a top level kind of domain number. It has its own drawer. So, so there are things that will go in a history subcategory basically, but it's a top level, right? So it's a 1000, and then I've got, 3 or 4 more options of subdividing it.
But that was a similar problem with Ryder in his bullet journal. Had to put so much information in the index to make sure you would always be able to find it without using this. And of course, typically a Moleskine or a Leduc type notebook would last 6 months. And I'd originally be using them forwards and backwards. So the normal day notes would go forward and the big projects go from the back, simply because that allowed an easier indexing issue. But it then meant I need a new one and I've got 20 pages spare because it's numbered up.
Well,
I don't find, and there's still a pile of notebooks around, but I don't find the engagement with a bit of paper, for me, being that much different with a screen, because I've got this screen as well. And this is always in the pocket. A laptop or a desktop isn't always in the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty damn sure you don't carry all those drawers and cards around with you either, right? So, but you carry blank ones, but you don't carry the resource.
Well, this one, it's a book, so I can, and this happens to be a new one that I made yesterday because I finished the other one.
Yeah.
But
so
what I'm
trying to
50
get
cards here.
What I'm trying to get to is not that you can make a new note, but you can actually pick up where you were in the office, bashing away on the desktop, or in your case, on a desktop with a pile of cards with you, and you then go out on a train or on a plane and you go, light bulb moment, yes, you could write a new card and you could write a new card anywhere on anything,
Right.
providing you remember to put it back in the system. But I've got the system. I haven't got to remember to do a unrequired transfer because it's here already, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's much more akin to the more correct way of doing, Dave Allen's getting things done. This does the thinking now. I might have a 3D map, but it does the thinking. I don't need an address book up here. It's here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Nobody remembers telephone number. It was one of the metaphors that was used in other conversations in the book. Nobody remembers telephone numbers anymore. In fact, the telephone numbers I do remember all start to be used as part of my passwords for logging in, because nobody else is going to know them.
Right.
You know? What was my telephone number when I was 12 years old? I can guarantee none of you 5 people would ever be able to figure that out.
I've done that too.
I know all of them.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. So I think the thing for me is I don't feel like I'm missing anything if I don't have my index with me, because I can write a card and I can say, you know, what the key, you know, I can figure out the keyword. I can write the keyword on there, and then, you know, and then I go back, you know, and then it's easy for me, you know, in the C's: causality, sensitary power, class, the Cold War, colonialism, comfort, common sense, communication, connections, consequences, contingency. You know, and it's just random.
So for your pile of output recently in whatever it is, Substack or whatever it is, all of the keywords in there, stroke tag words, I mean, using keywords much more as an SEO use of the word keyword, right? All the keywords as well as tags that you might have that are internal to the system. How many of those, out of all those essays you've written, and or those essays you've updated what other people have written, right? Because I find that quite useful. I've only read maybe half dozen of them, because most of them I'm not that interested in, but 1 or 2 strike a bell and so it goes through the noggin and all the rest of it. How many of those? Where's the older English, the Elizabethan English alias of what is the keyword?
I don't know what you're asking.
Obsidian particularly has aliases, which is not in Evernote, right? And you've just read out an index, and if for whatever reason the document has said change - climate instead of climate change, for instance, as an absurd example, you can't find it in your system because you don't have aliases. Except
yes, I do. I have climate, and I have a, you know, and on the climate card I can have change, right? As a, you know, I mean, so I've got these, you know, these cards.
So
if we got a top level you know, idea, and then they've got, you know, many of them have, you know, kind of sub ideas, and if they're big enough, and I think Scott talked about, I thought that was a valuable part of what Scott talked about is, you know, they get big enough, then they get their own cards, right? Then climate change, if I have enough things about that, then that will become its own thing, and it'll be there will be an arrow on climate that says go to climate change.
So it going back to one of the more technical items that we all had some issues and problems with. You've almost got your index, you're just like in the page number. So when you do a book output, or even a reasonably long enough paper that requires an index, you could go back and pick all those words out.
Oh yeah.
Without having, because you said about the fact that you reread your own book, highlighted all the ones you wanted an index, and then built the index, right? But you've got to be able, because you want the page number, you've got to be able to print at the right size, right?
Yes.
Which is not,
unless unless it's an ebook and you're hyperlinking, which is great. But yeah, I mean, and I think that part of that, you know, the focus of that is who's your reader, right? And so as I'm indexing, I can imagine indexing the same text in 2 different ways, depending on who I think is going to read it and what it is, you know, and what types of things they're going to be interested in. As I'm writing, you know, sort of lecture or textbook content, right? I'm also sort of keywording and indexing, you know, things that students would have, and it depends. It varies, you know, what level of audience I have, you know, whether I will tell them, you know, sort of basic things that they could, you know, that somebody who has more experience or is a professional historian or something will obviously know about, and I won't have to say it, you know. So I think there's a lot, there's a lot kind of involved in who I'm, for whom I'm writing, and what it is that I think I'm producing for them, and
Even
where
from
the
a even from a historical
So that would be the same.
how you index your material and how you arrange it will depend on what your end goal is. So somebody like Luhmann, who's touching on thousands of topics that all relate to, let's say, systems theory and sociology, is going to have a dramatically different system than, let's say, Gertrude Bauer. Let's use a relatively new example of somebody with a really significant, she had some 15,000 index cards, and she used it to produce one, and as far as I can tell, only one journal article that dramatically shifted the field she was in. So she spent a decade and a half collecting examples of Greek loanwords into Coptic and created this massive linguistic database. It's not, in the last few years, it's actually been digitized, so you can go online and look it up and sift through it. But she used a very, commonplace book, topical heading organization for how she did it, because she wants to be totally complete and thorough, and essentially read every scrap of ancient Egyptian into Coptic from the earliest centuries to modern day, and then categorized all those examples almost in the completest way that the Oxford English Dictionary tries to collect every word. And if anybody's read the story of that, they used a slip box method, essentially, literally, pigeonhole boxes with slips of paper to collect all their examples. But how you do it will make a difference. And you can compare that even with, to go back to Tim's, mention of kind of a notebook place system. W. Ross Ashby has an online repository of all of his notebooks, and they've also scanned, he kept a separate, kind of library catalog card index of all the material in his notebooks. So instead of keeping a notebook with the index in the notebook, we had notebooks and then index them with index cards, so you can cross-reference them across space and time, which I haven't seen an awful lot of people do, but if you were going to, that's kind of an interesting way to do it. Or I saw recently somebody built a digital index system for their commonplace book practice. So they have physical notebooks.
Right.
Instead of keeping the index in the notebooks, they have an online digital index, so that they put the notes in the notebook and then they index it on a digital system, so they have the digital search capability, and then they know exactly which notebook and which page, top, bottom, middle, to go to. And he essentially turned it into a service, so anybody who has a commonplace book practice can use his indexing system. I presume it's exportable, so that when he dies and his website disappears, your index doesn't go with it.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, the ways that the indexing is I think, and actually, as you were talking, Chris, I was reminded, hey Greg, I was just reading the introduction, I think, to Raymond Williams's Keywords, where he was sort of talking about the thing that how what he was doing with sort of musing about these words and their different meanings in different contexts and different disciplines and stuff was different from what the OED had done. And he sort of makes this, spend some time on this comparison, which is interesting, because it makes it a much more, it makes it a much more personal thing, but a much more subjective and arguably less kind of universal sort of understanding. But that's what I think we're all kind of doing here, right? Is we're looking to create our own sort of idiosyncratic, unique understandings of these things, and part of it has to do with the words that we use and the ways that we use them.
Yeah, and to me, that's why I like the idea of knowing bunches of examples of people who've used these. What did they use them for? What did they get out of them?
Mm-hmm.
And then can you take that set of examples and what you can extract from it to figure out which mode or model you might get the most benefit from, so you can do that without reinventing the wheel from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Or get involved in, if you come to it and your first experience is Scott's Antinet setup and
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't work for you, you're going to throw the whole enterprise away because you don't know there are 4 other ways you could have done it.
Except that Scott has given you that clue by bashing them all.
Yeah.
Well, aside from Scott and his paper newsletter, which for whatever reason, I sort of tried to twist his arm to say there's no carrier pigeons to here. Right? So given you do a newsletter-ish thing in type to my screen, send me the paid one as well. But he was adamant he wasn't going to do it. He might change his mind. I don't know. Not that I really care too much. I'm partly because of what we're chewing over globally today, particularly, is I'm going to be rather curious what happens to Scott when he does his next significant size project. He's effectively got to put this 3D map that he's lived with so intensely to one side and start from scratch to do a new one, because he can't possibly write Zettelkasten Part 2, what I didn't say before. Because in theory, there's nothing left, right? So, and I know from when I go from really big, significant projects where I'm on it full time, like the Royal Opera House London, or like Atlantis the Palm in Dubai, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Atlantis the Palm, 9,000 rooms, physical rooms, right? And I know I'm one of a handful of people that's been to every one at least twice, right? So the mental model I have to drop of all the layering of the systems, etc., when I go to the next project and say, okay, chaps, where's the water tanks? Because day one, I don't know, right?
Right.
And then start to build this multi-layer model of all of the systems, the services, where all the main components are, and all this, so I can walk practically blindfolded from one to the other. I'm just wondering what Scott's going to do, and more importantly, how far away from that book is he going to be able to move? Is he going to be able to do, I don't know, how to solve the biodiversity issue?
Right.
Or is he going to go back in our reading list and say, I have a solution to the unrealized poverty in the US, or whatever, right?
And it's the Antinet. Yeah, that's going to be the danger, right? Is that logic, that structure it's going to be hard to avoid having it sort of suggest itself as the metaphor for as the model, or as the structure for the next thing.
I know in some respects I'm lucky. All buildings, almost all buildings have got a ground floor, right? Almost all buildings have got a roof, right? And they've generally got some walls. After that, it's up for grabs, right?
Right.
I mean, I've done 1-story buildings, and I've done 147-story buildings, So, and downwards as well. I mean, this is how stupid it was. First time I went to Oslo, I was on a crappy flight out of London. Last flight, no meal properly, really grumpy. They gave me my ticket. I'm driving up in a taxi to this hotel. And it's a one-story hotel. It's not very big. Okay. They give me my key and they said it's on level 3. No, what? You're a single-story building. He said, no, we go down the mountainside.
Yeah.
Right. So
what it looks like from the front is not what it looks like from the back.
from the front, it looks like a Norwegian country house, single story. Right. Mm-hmm. You walk around the other side and it's a 10-story building down a mountain. Anyway, so what Scott's got to be able to dump into a safe place, because he won't want to let go. Right? You know, I can remember stuff I was doing in the 70s. But I know I can't remember, what was the grid number for? Or what was the door number? I can't remember that, but I can remember the overall shape, size, and
sure. Yeah.
That's why the
but I also worry about the way the mindsets are for, particularly you take the other sort of person from, say, Scotland, me, for instance, maybe, is I've never built a house. I've worked on projects with several thousand houses, but I've never built a house from top to bottom, and everything in it. But I've done hospitals top to bottom. I've done hotels. I've done data centers, office blocks, military airfields, whole range. But I've never done a house. Yet, how to build a house is where all the basic engineering and architectural education is done, because we all know what a 2-story house in theory looks like, mm-hmm. Right? But when I spoke to most of my staff here, none of them, not one, had lived in a 2-story house. Mm-hmm. They're all 1-story, all their tower blocks. So the rural kid is in a 1-story with a palm thatch roof because he's from wet side of India or something, or Philippines. And or there's the guy from Hong Kong who says, I've never lived below level 10. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So his mental model of the world is going to change. And it's a bit like, we've got 2 or 3 academics here, and teachers to some extent. If you're a high school / senior school teacher, you are teaching the same syllabus pretty much. It might change slowly because that sort of thing changes slowly. Mm-hmm. And you're doing basically the same thing about the same week of the year on year. The students change. That's where your joy is you get to know different students, right? Yes, I've got 2 people nodding a little bit, but not very committed.
Well, I don't know. I probably recognize that. To paraphrase Chris, I resemble that remark, but I don't actually do it that way. I don't really have things in the can.
As I understand it, you're a college teacher. You're not a school teacher, so you're not quite in the same position.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
yes.
Maybe.
Right. You may be calling it the same course, but 2 years ago you'd have been talking a lot about peppermint, and now you're going to be talking about something else for the same period because you've got a different bent on your interests. You've got flex. It's your course. It's not a federal course. Mm. Federally funded, maybe, and works within an umbrella. But I don't know. You tell me, right? But like, for instance, every hospital that I did in the UK was totally different. Some had pediatrics, some had maternity. Some of them didn't have A&E or ER, as you know. Mm-hmm. Right? But others were research teaching hospitals, so they had a different set of rooms. I've also got hospitals that are not veterinary hospitals, but they've got rooms full of mice, rats, and guinea pigs and rabbits and stuff as well. Mm-hmm. And they have a different set of rules and regulations that don't even mention the word hospital.
Right.
So
So,
there's
so
elements-
bring that back around to the Zettelkasten for me though.
it's Lumen's, to me, as Chris has intimated to a section, Lumen's mapped out his area. He's learned how to do his Zettelkasten while he's learning how to do his academic job.
Mhm.
As I remember it, he wasn't trained that way. He did it later in life,
Mhm.
right? And a bit like you. So it is effectively, I suppose, you could call it his second or his third career, right?
Mhm.
He's taught himself the Zettelkasten process as he's evolved and worked his way into his academic subject.
Mhm.
And he never left. The odd thing he wrote about that wasn't his sociology thing was writing about the Zettel.
Yeah.
Right? That seems to be it, right? And to me, it's a bit like, who's a good example? Oh, Steven Pinker.
Yeah.
Right? Steven Pinker has at some point been a lab-based neuro guy, right? But his last 3 or 4 books, nothing in it. He's learned the academic skill of writing a book, and like the last but 2 or 3 books ago was how to write. It wasn't even science.
Well,
or
but he's
biology
got
even.
he's got the experience.
It was a style book. A style book that was against style books.
I didn't read it.
But he's
I quite liked. I found it quite a refreshing read, actually. Quick one, even though there was a lot of semi-technical English lecture type stuff.
Hmm.
But the way he obviously found examples over his lifetime,
Mhm.
and he brought them all in of how academics speak
Hmm.
from their ivory towers. On that basis, they should never be let out. Really, was his
Well, we should probably there seems to be a side conversation going on about GPT. Do we want to talk about that briefly, because we're coming up on or we're past 11:45, so we've been here quite a while. So GPT, I haven't really run into it yet, and I guess my sense on it was that it was I'm sort of following Jaron Lanier's advice, I guess. But what's the what is going on in other people's situations? Greg?
I played with it briefly.
I'll tell you, what? I'm sorry, Tim. I was interrupting you. Go ahead.
The chat GPT stopped being taught early 2021. So I happened to ask it about COP15 in Montreal, which was last year. It was going back to COP15 for climate change 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes up and tells you, it's very polite. It doesn't tell you to F off when it should do, really. But it also loses track a bit. So if you ask it for something a bit more sensible for us, say, give me the top 10 papers in your capacity about Zettelkasten, it gives you 10 papers. When you say, oh, and can you give me the next 10? You'll get 7 that are different, 3 repeats. It also, where other friends have been using it, somebody that lives here, who's a Serbian photographer, asked it to give him a poem about Dubai in the winter. And he come up with a very lyrical poem. Wasn't a great poem, but it was a poem. And like a 12, 15-year-old school kid, I suppose. But the more intense questioning of it, and the more focusing from a wide point of view. If you know nothing about something for whatever reason, instead of going to Google and saying, what is a Zettelkasten? And you don't get an answer from Google, you get pointers to other places. Whereas this will give you 200-300 words, and it won't really be wrong. It won't necessarily be great, but it won't be wrong. Providing
it's a new standard
whatever
of quality.
Well, no, providing what you're asking is inside its learning period. So as I say, if by quirk of fate, on the first time I used it, I literally just asked it about COP15 because it was running. Simply because it was the question on top of my head. But other ones, Heyday is a version of it that looks at what you're doing. You don't ask it questions until later. And then, rather like searching your Evernote, you start typing an output, not a question. It pops up and says, "Oi, Tim, you've got a note about this and another one over there." That's in where you've told it to look for your notes.
Interesting. Looks like Greg and Chris have got something.
Yeah, I actually used it I actually have played I'll give you two examples. So I was playing around with it, and what's really nice is you can actually use it within Obsidian, and then it would record all of your, all the results and whatever within Obsidian, which is actually kind of cool. So I asked it to go ahead and create the lyrics for a romantic ballad, and it comes up with the lyrics, and it was absolutely beautiful, the poetry that it actually put into this. And I just said romantic ballad, didn't give it any other features. I then asked it to go ahead and add, since I play ukulele, I said add ukulele chords to this, and it put in ukulele chords that actually sounded like a great song. I was so impressed. So then I asked it to go ahead and write give me the lyrics of a rock song in the style of Elton John, a 70s rock song in the style of Elton John. Boom, out comes these lyrics. And then I said, now go ahead and apply guitar chords to it. And boom, it comes out. And I'm like, oh, this is phenomenal. I'm thinking, okay, this is going to take away a lot of the creativity from a lot of people who are just going to use this to be able to write their lyrics. Because I have to admit, the lyrics that came out of it was phenomenal. Then I asked it, I really want to take Nick Milo's course, right, for linking your thinking. And so I said, write a memo to my boss to let me take a PKM class that would have, and I just took some of the attributes that he actually has in his class. And I said, go ahead and create this thing. It came out with this beautifully composed memo that I literally, I'm going to go ahead and almost cut and paste that and send that off to my boss. It was that well, from my perspective, I think it was that well done. I was really impressed with what it came back with. And so those are kind of, some of the experiments that I've just been playing with it. But I have to admit, the lyrics, for it to come out with this romantic ballad that was just phenomenal, and then to add chords, whether it be ukulele chords or guitar chords to the song that would actually flow appropriately. It's amazing. So that's my 2 cents.
Cool.
The first thing I did was throw in, what is a Zettelkasten? And it gave me every single one of the common myths with zero insight whatsoever about what that is. And it also included the Luhmann invented it line, which just was like, okay, I can totally see the flaws in it. So I think there are, and eventually it assuredly will get better.
Yeah.
And it will have potentially some of the creative things to be able to mix genres the way Greg mentioned, which is interesting. But will it be able to really generate useful, actionable insights in ways that humans can?
Mhm.
Can it take, dramatically disparate ideas and connect them in useful and interesting, intriguing ways? And I other than some of the art and music stuff, which is kind of general mashups, I don't see. I mean, I can see as a teacher or professor assigning something that a student could use it to generate something that has footnotes, but can it also provide something new and unique that's an interest to insight that hasn't been thought of or done before by putting those things together? And I've yet to see, at least in the outside of mushy literary music or art spaces, it kind of doing that thing with just basic knowledge. So can it do, I've seen articles that it can pass the USMLE test, which is, a lot of that stuff is just general basic fact, or, can you add two numbers together and get the third? But can it, generate something at the level of, a master's thesis or a PhD thesis in an interesting way? And I've yet to see great evidence that it can do that. So, but
have you looked at Reader and the ghost reader aspect that's in Readwise's Reader? Okay, because I have to admit, Readwise's Reader, which also uses, I think it actually uses GPT as well as its back end. It'll go through all your highlights that you put in a book, from a book, it would, or from a magazine article, or whatever the case may be. Whatever you throw into Reader, you can then go ahead and have it do one of five things: summarize the article, write 5 questions, 5 not provocative, but basically 5 really good questions about what the article is about, so that you would have to answer it. And then there's some other aspects of what it does. I've got it on one of my other screens. And I have to admit, that was actually really kind of nice for it to go ahead and be able to summarize the highlights of what I chose, or I could choose the whole article. For instance, in Medium, if there was an article that I was reading, I really liked it, and I wanted to go ahead and just kind of have it go ahead and kind of give me the summary of the highlighted points of it, it would actually go through and do that. And I have to admit, from my perspective, it was pretty impressive.
Let me point out that, Chris, you have an opportunity here to do a little experiment. I don't know if you folks know about this, or maybe there's another level here. What you do is you explain to Chat GPT, you are an expert in historical Zettelkasten. You have a PhD in sociology, in literary studies, and you understand that there are various aspects to the question that I'm about to ask, and I want you to, nuance this. You explain that, and then you ask your question, then you hit return. And you're going to see that you're going to get a very different kind of answer than if you just say, hey, what's a Zettelkasten? Because it pitches its level at the level that you ask the question at. It's mind-blowing. I'm telling you.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, I think that I assume that at some point I am going to have to deal with it, with student essays and things like that. In the meantime, right now I don't feel like that is an immediate issue, kind of primarily because I'm not, because I'm asking some very specific things about, probably some readings that are not, will not have been accessible to, to this device unless it has mined everything that's in the Internet Archive. But at some point it will, I suppose, and then I'll have to contend with that.
Well, somebody asked about the copyright issues.
I actually asked it.
Somebody came back because it had the visual, the image question
didn't-
had come up because of what the system had been trained on. I mean, I wonder about that too, because if, for example, I ask, kind of an academic question and I also ask it to give references,
Mhm.
it will generate references. Now that would imply, if the references are meaningful, that the system has had access to those writings. And I'm just trying to figure out, well, how would that work? How could you get journal article content into this system? I mean, wouldn't you have to ask the journal? Or, I mean, what are the legalities of some of the things that seem to happen?
Mike at Reader Rabbit or Research Rabbit seems to have figured that out or cracked that code, and I'm not entirely sure if it was in a repeatable way, but
Right.
I actually asked Chat GPT, for instance, like on the lyrics. I said, who legally owns the lyrics that was created? Is it me with the suggestion of what I'm looking for, or is it you that has the, who actually wrote it? They said neither, that it becomes public domain at that point,
Right.
that no one owns it.
Well, I'm not so, I mean, I understand that part. If it's really being constructive, it's
Mhm.
like me, when I reference something, you're paraphrasing, you're summarizing, you're not really plagiarizing in the sense of copying and pasting. But I think the issue comes down more to, what did you use to create your, I don't know, for a better word, knowledge base?
Mhm.
If it's somehow using the core content from a published book or journal article, it's not having someone enter summarizations, it's using the actual content. I mean, so if, I don't know, it's almost acting, the logic seems to be acting as if the company behind this, how would that work? It's not doing it through anybody making the personal effort to summarize and cite and things like that. It's accessing the core content, which I guess that's an interest. That's where I think the question becomes. Likewise, somebody mentioned the artwork. It's using other people's original artwork without their, controlled contribution, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and I think probably the music example is, I don't know, I find that kind of interesting because you could say that that you can create if someone has asked you to write a song that is kind of a bright song, a positive song, you will, with a knowledge, kind of with a basic knowledge of music theory, right? There are some, and especially with a library of all the songs, right? There are some chord progressions that sort of would naturally, present themselves as candidates, right? And so that, and then with the knowledge of instruments, ukulele versus guitar versus piano, right? You might be able to, and so the question in my mind is, how much different is that from, Max Martin, doing the same thing? And so where is that, what is it that's unique, that are we going to claim is unique about the human creative process that uses these same, uses kind of this same set of rules and, and criteria, and comes up with something, based on that.
Or if we want to use the Jesuit practice of descending into the particular, I remember probably 15 years ago, there was it was at post Rain Man, and they were doing a story on essentially autism and spectrum disorders, and they had an example of a kid in his late teens, early 20s, who was profoundly autistic, but had at least some level of interaction. And he was a virtuoso piano player and knew, all of the traditions. And they've sat down and they said, essentially that musical question that was put to Chat GPT, take this, Elton John 70s philosophy and mix it with a little bit of Mozart. And 3 seconds later, the kid created a new composition that perfectly melded the sounds and influences of both of those two things in a new creation. But because it came from a human, it's copyrightable, it's usable, it's his. He certainly didn't have the ability to exploit it in any way, shape, or form. His parents or family could have maybe. But you compare that with the particulars of almost the exact same thing with a computer file that is able to accomplish the same thing. And then what are the differences between those two? And it's, the subtleties of asking that question are then how do you tease apart what's happening and what use or not use is it, but 20 more years of climate change and we don't have energy and no more computers. And what are we going to be left with?
and everybody's lost that skill. So we'll have to go to Fahrenheit 451. And on that note, maybe at 12:06 my time, we should cut this off. Do we want to resume next week with this?
I'm ready.
Okay. I've got a second. So that was a motion and a second. Do we want to have any discussion of that, or shall we have a vote? All in favor? All right.
And there's at least one or two more votes, I think, in the. But this, I will say too, this is a relatively short book compared to the doorstops we've been reading.
Yeah.
So there is a page in our Obsidian Vault for recommendations for future things. So we should, because this is so short, we should put out a call for ideas for the one after this.
Yes.
Because it's going to go by a whole lot quicker, I think.
I got to imagine this is going to go by in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, at the rate we were reading Scott's book, we probably could do this book in a week. But my guess is there's going to be, given what we don't know about this area, we'll probably have more questions and fewer answers.
Right.
So
I would suggest probably for next week we would do either part 1 or parts 1 and 2. Part 1 is Pirates and Mock Kings of the Malagasy Northeast, and part 2 is the Advent of Pirates. It's called Pirate Enlightenment or the Real Libertalia by David Graeber. And part 2 is called The Advent of Pirates from a Malagasy Point of View. And then part 3 is Pirate Enlightenment, and then the concluding chapter and some appendix.
I had seen a review of it that said it was a not bad essay, but a terrible book.
That wouldn't surprise me entirely, although Marcus Rediker, who is kind of the historian of pirates of record, liked it. Chomsky said it was very illuminating, but he's senile. Cory Doctorow, Rosemary Joyce, and James C. Scott, who is the anarchist still at Yale, who Graeber has had some back and forth with, all had, they were all willing to blurb it. So I think it might be fun to take a look at.
Does everybody have a copy of it?
No.
The other thing you're working against, Dan, too, and essentially it's 3 parts, and you've recommended doing the first 2.
Well, I said 1 or 2. We could vote on that.
But it may be, if people don't have the book yet, it may be easier to do the first part.
Okay.
And then from there we can do parts 2 and 3
Mhm.
if
All
it
right.
seems like it's going quick. I haven't started it yet, so
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do part 1.
that'll give people a little more time and then they can catch up.
It's only like 40, 45 pages or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this Chat GPT thing develops and how quickly it develops.
I noticed too, you in your recording here today, I can't cheat out the chat, so make sure you save it before.
Oh yeah, I'll
or it may save it automatically. I don't know.
It does. Yeah, it does. When I record it, it gives me a text file that I can copy over.
Cool. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dan.
All right. Thanks a lot.
And thanks, Scott.
Yeah. And thanks to Scott. All right. So see you all soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.